Good afternoon. I'm Chris Cumming. I'm what's called the first Vice President and Chief Operating Officer here at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And on behalf of our President, Bill Dudley, and myself, I want to welcome you all to this meeting of the National Research Council for Women. And it really is a thrill to have you here to hear the program that is about to start. When I checked your mission statement, I was really impressed to see that research, policy, and advocacy are the three watchwords of your organization. Here at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and really at the Federal Reserve System, we also talk about research, policy formulation, and policy implementation as being what we're all about. And when we ask ourselves here at the New York Fed what makes us special and unusual, it is that ability to take our research folks and work with those who formulate policy and then those who implement policy in the field to really have the opportunity for all those people to work together and feed on the insights. I have the great privilege of having spent time in each of our three important missions: monetary policy, financial supervision, and payments. And really the touchstone for me is my beginning of a career, which was here in the research department at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So we really honor your mission and see a lot of reflection in the mission that we have. We also have an important overlap with your mission, your focus on women and girls. And as we all know, one of the most important influences on the fate of women and girls in our society and around the world is the health and dynamism of the economy, the strength of the labor market, and the access to capital and funding and educational opportunity, all of which are important elements of the research program and the mission of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So again, we really welcome you. This is a great start to Women's History Month. Will be our signature event for this month, and we really welcome you all and hope you enjoy your day here. Thank you. And now I think I turn it over to Linda.
Right. Thank you, Christine. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see you and to welcome you to our annual Experts Roundtable. And I want to thank the Federal Reserve Bank, especially Diane Ashley, the Chief Diversity Officer, and Christine Cummings, the First Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. I invite you to read their bios. They are really impressive. And it's wonderful to be here in this landmark building. It's just a privilege. Thank you. And we very much appreciate your hospitality also. And I know that the bank is doing some very interesting things around advancing women. And of course, they're a member of our corporate circle, so we do have the chance to hear some of that. I also want to thank our underwriters, our sponsors, the many co-sponsors whom you can see listed on the screen and in your programs. And of course, nothing happens by itself. So a very big thank you to the NCRW crew. I think you're seeing them around. I also want to thank the Federal Reserve crew. You've been wonderful. And I especially want to call out Shama Venkateshwar and Andrea Greenblatt at the Council. Thank you. So this is a very special moment for the National Council for Research on Women. It's the launch of our 30th anniversary. And I want to tell you just a little bit about the Council. We began in 1982 as a collaborative network of 28 women's research, policy, and advocacy centers. And some of our very early centers were at Pembroke, Radcliffe, Michigan, Spelman, Barnard, Rutgers, the Feminist Press. This was still at the beginning in 1982 of the academic women's movement and the early days of policy center activism. But these three groups of research, policy, and advocacy, and Christine, thank you for calling them out, quickly grew into a thriving network of now more than 100 centers dedicated to promoting rights and opportunities for women and girls. We also now have a corporate circle of some 35 major companies and a president circle of college and university presidents, all of whom share our commitments. And what great milestones this collaborative movement has helped generate over the past 30 years. We've seen U.S. legislation such as the Family and Medical Leave Act, the Violence Against Women Act, the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. Globally, we've seen increasing recognition of the important roles women can play in building healthy families, communities, and economies, again, as Christine said. And around the world, we've watched women become the majority of college graduates, all the way up to the PhD in some fields. We at the Council firmly believe that much of this change would not have happened without strong activism based on solid research. At the Council, an important part of our work has been a stocktaking of the gains and gaps in the lives of women and girls. We've examined the status of women in science and technology, in the corporate arena, in higher education, and globally in terms of human security. In all of this work, we're solutions-oriented, recommending changes to the status quo, stirring debate, and influencing the public as well as key decision makers. But to many of us, things have not changed enough, and the issues are not so different from 30 years ago. There are 1.2 billion people living in extreme poverty in the world today, and 70% of those people are women, who are still denied the basic rights and opportunities they need to improve their social and economic circumstances. And this feminization of poverty is not exclusive to the developing world. In the US, we currently have 17 million women living in poverty, the highest rate in 17 years. I'm sure we'll hear a bit of this from the panel today. And it's troubling, 1 in 5 children in this country lives below the poverty line. We might not know this from the level of public discourse lately, but these are the issues we really need to address. But we believe that there's an important power source for change, and that's women. Unfortunately, we still see far too women in decision-making positions. We're still stuck at somewhere from 15 to 17% across sectors in this country, and in some areas we're in the single digits. We need more women to make the kinds of structural and cultural changes that might correct some of the continuing imbalances. We really need diversity at the top in decision-making positions. We need a diversity of perspectives, points of view, thinking. So there are a number of reports now that have recently been issued on the status of women and girls, both globally and here in the US, and we are thrilled to have been able to invite some of the authors, co-authors of those reports, along with some top analysts, to share with us their findings, but also to discuss the kinds of directions that we need to take in our advocacy, research, and policy efforts. We all know that it's only when research is paired with advocacy and collaboration that we will be able to bring about sustainable change. So, we invite all of you to stay tuned to the Council and our network and join with us to effect the changes we'll hear about today. I hope you'll leave your cards, give them to some of our staff who are milling around, or myself. Visit our website at ncrw.org. And now, it's my privilege to introduce you to this stellar panel. I first want to introduce the moderator, Pat Mitchell. Pat is the first person here on my right. Pat is president and CEO of the Paley Center for Media. She has led an extraordinary career in media, both in front of the camera and behind the scenes in executive suites. She was president of Ted Turner's production company, worked for Time Warner, and was the first woman and first producer to become president and CEO of PBS. And I'm going to say a few words about our panelists. Immediately to Pat's right is Jenny Klugman, Director of Gender and Development at the World Bank, who worked previously on UNDP's Human Development Report. She has worked with numerous international organizations and published on topics ranging from poverty reduction strategies and labor markets to health reform and education. And immediately to her right is Raquel Russell, who serves on the White House Domestic Policy Council as Special Assistant to the President for Mobility and Opportunity. She works on health reform and a range of public health issues, including reproductive health. And next to her is Sadia Zahidi. She's director and head of constituents at the Davos World Economic Forum, where she engages women leaders, gender parity groups, religious leaders, and labor leaders. And she's also the co-author of the forum's Global Gender Gap Report series, a really important report for us all to be looking at. And all the way down at the end, we have Iris Bonet. She is academic dean and professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, where she's also director of the Women in Public Policy program, which we're very proud is an NCRW member center. Iris serves on numerous boards of international academic institutions, and her work has been featured frequently in leading academic journals. So I'm so pleased to turn the panel over to all of you. Enlighten us. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this annual gathering for NCRW. And I can tell by the excited looks on all your faces and the fact you took this time off in the afternoon to come here today that you're as interested as I am in discovering not only what the findings of these status on women and girls reports tell us, but also how we translate those findings into strategies, into policy, into action. And that's the purpose of the panelists today. And I will introduce them and their reports, and then after a brief conversation among us, we'll be opening it up to hear from you. So be thinking about the specific questions that arise as you hear the panelists describe. But one of the thoughts that I had over the weekend is Linda sent me my weekend reading, which was this big, and said, happy preparation for the panel. And as I was making my way through these reports, all of which, of course, are extraordinarily interesting and important for all different kinds of reasons, you know, I kept thinking, okay, so how are we using this? We know that some things have gotten better, some things have not. Why? What can we do about it? The whole connection, as Linda so brilliantly said, between research and advocacy. So we'll begin with Jenny Klugman from the World Bank. And as many of you probably know, the World Bank does this report every year, has for many years, probably close to 30. But never have they done a report, a status report, through the gender lens. So this is significant in itself. And I assume there are just as many significant findings. So enlighten us.
Okay, thanks, Pat. As you mentioned, the World Development Report on Gender Equality was an important landmark, I think, for the World Bank in important ways. I won't go through the entire report. It was one of the probably thicker ones in your pile. Indeed. It's at least a couple of hundred pages, although there's a 4-page summary available outside. But
I didn't get that.
Here you go.
The cliff notes would have been helpful.
But it is very much a story about progress and persistent gaps and then what to do. And let me talk a little bit about the first two, and then maybe we can come back to the what's to do. I think the good news is that it documents improvements in women and girls' lives around the world at a pace and at a scale that it was unimaginable, I think, 20 or 30 years ago. So there have been unprecedented gains in a whole range of areas in many countries around the world. As was already mentioned, in fact, today there are more female university students globally than men around the world. In fact, their participation has increased 7-fold in the last 40 years. So that's a very dramatic rate of change. Another summary indicator is that of health, of life expectancy. The increase there has been of the order of 20 years. Just over the past several decades. At the same time, as the report well documents, there are major gaps. I think one of the most egregious and most striking is that of missing women, which was first highlighted, indeed, a couple of decades ago by Amartya Sen. And this is the higher rate at which women and girls die or are not born relative to men. And the annual estimate of missing women is 3.9 million women annually. 2/5 of those are never born due to preference for sons. 1/6 die in early childhood, and then over 1/3 of those die, a third of them die during their reproductive years. So there are enormous gaps, and what the report argues is that this is important for intrinsic reasons. It's an infringement of basic rights. But what it also does, I think very importantly, is document the business case for addressing this, which is important for the World Bank because we're in dialogue with finance ministers, with planning ministers, with heads of state. So there are just a couple of points I wanted to make now. One is that the costs of gender inequality, as shown in the report, are not only large, they're also growing. So with globalization, the costs, the inefficiencies associated with the deprivation of opportunities are becoming more important. And we can see that in a number of cases around the world. On the one hand, where women are participating, for example, in Malaysia and India, in the growth of ICT sectors, for example. And then we see other countries, for example, Senegal, which has done quite well in the bean export market, but where only 1 in 59 workers in this sector is a woman. So women are not participating there. There are also, I think, quite impressive estimates of, depressing estimates of the losses due to lack of access to mobile phones, for example. So in India, women are 40% less likely to own a mobile phone than men. In Africa, they're about 1/4 less likely. That's the average for the whole continent. So that we have an estimate that this is a loss in revenues of some $13 billion a year. The other main point that I wanted to make, and I think it's an important recognition by the World Bank, which is very much focused on economic growth, is that growth won't tackle these issues alone. There's a very important role for progressive public policies in addressing these constraints, these persistent gaps. And it shows the contributions that health and education, quality services can make. It also documents the importance of legal regimes, both formal as well as informal institutions and laws. And these matter a lot. We were talking earlier about CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against All Forms of Women, and the role that that's played in a number of countries around the world in promoting gender equality in legislation. At the same time, we actually have a companion report that may be of interest to a number of you called Women, Business and the Law. And it looks systematically at 141 countries around the world and the extent to which there's gender parity in property law, in citizenship rights, and a whole range of areas. And in 103 of the 141 countries, there are significant gaps in at least one of those areas. So there's an enormous amount to do. These gaps have impose important costs, not only on the women themselves and their families, but for the community and the society and the economy at large. But let me stop there, and I'm happy to